Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you very much for joining us, wherever you're joining us from. My name is Nick Hiscox, and this is Mike Smales. It's a great pleasure to welcome you to our special event being hosted by two churches, Christchurch Westbourne, where I'm based, and Lansdowne Church, where Mike is based.
Well, it's great. We're excited this evening to have Rico Tice with us as well. Hi, Rico. Welcome. It's good to have you. Rico works in London. He works for a church there, senior minister, I think, All Souls Church in London, situated in the heart near the BBC buildings there. Also, the founder of Christianity Explored Ministries. We'll hear a bit more about that this evening too. Rico's going to be talking. And after that, he's going to be speaking to that question, what is success? But there's going to be an opportunity for us to engage with him during this session this evening. And we hope many of you will feel able to do that. I know some of you have put your questions ready for him in advance through the website. But if you want to post questions now, you can either put them straight into the YouTube chat, or you can actually use the email address that's scrolling across the bottom of the screen at the moment. Well, Rico, welcome. It's great to have you with us. And,
I wish I was by the coast. I'd go swimming. I can't bear it. I'm in the middle of London.
Well, we'll have you down another time soon, hopefully.
Yeah.
We've heard that you work for a church in London. You're founder of Christianity Explored, but tell us a bit about you. Who is Rico Tice?
Well, just to say, it is Rico Tice, not Tico Rice. I spent my life being called Tico Rice, which sounds like number 42 at the takeaway, doesn't it? No. I've been a Church of England clergyman for 25 years here in central London. I didn't originally come from a Christian home, but I came to faith as a teenager. I'm married to Lucy, and we've got 3 kids. So that was Daniel, my number 2 kid, who just came in. The word Daniel means the Lord is my judge, but he's not worked that out yet. So I guess that's my thing there. There we are. Yeah. So family man in central London working for the Church of England.
Now, I did mention a moment ago Christianity Explored. That's a course that you founded. Maybe tell us what lay behind that. Why Christianity Explored? Where did it all begin for you?
Well, actually, when I was at uni, I had lots of rugby mates that had questions and didn't really have a forum to ask them in. And that's what got me thinking. And it can often be very helpful if you've got questions to hear someone else who's at the same point as you are asking the same question. And, so there's a community in doing that. So I suppose it was, coach trips back from rugby matches and things like that got me sort of thinking about it. And then I worked for a church and found that, lots of people wanted to bring friends who are asking questions. And actually, amazingly, in COVID, we've had a massive uptake because, of course, COVID has presented so many questions for people.
And you mentioned a moment ago you didn't grow up in the church, didn't grow up in a Christian family. Where did it begin then for you?
Well, it's been very like COVID. In 1982, my godfather was killed suddenly in a cliff fall. So on the 6th of August, he was my dad's older brother, my uncle. We were close. And the sudden loss of a loved one made me see the brevity of life. I suddenly thought, actually, life is very fragile. I've probably taken 15 COVID funerals over the last year. And, you say at the graveside at a funeral, as for man, his days are like grass. He flourishes like a flower of the field, but the wind blows its place and remembers it no more. And I suddenly saw the brevity of life with the loss of my godfather. So when a maths teacher at the school said to me, look, if Christ got through death, he can get you through. I can remember thinking, well, if that's true, it's the most important thing in the world because we're dead a long time. So it was that as a teenager was my waking up. It was the loss of a loved one. And I think that's what set me on the journey to thinking about Christian faith deeply.
It's a bit of a hackneyed thing to say now, isn't it? That we've had a 15 months like no other with the COVID thing. And you mentioned it there. Are there things that you observe, particularly in people over the last year and a bit, Rico, as you see them in London? Have you learned things or seen new things about people? Or?
Yeah, I think it's been fascinating in terms of where we are as human beings. I think actually, interestingly, death is not a taboo subject because of the numbers on the news or at the moment, the agony of India. So suddenly it's gone from taboo, you can't really mention it because it's bad form, to reality. And that has made it much easier to be a minister, you're sort of much more useful, because people go, well, they do need hope. I was on the street inviting people to our service in the summer, and a lovely Australian man stopped, and he said, he was trying not to be patronizing. It was a bit, but I still was touched. He said, look, I don't believe any of this, but I'm glad you're here trying to give people hope. And I mean, there's that. I think that cancelled diaries have meant that we know we're not in control. Again, that has caused people to be thinking much more deeply, to not feel, well, I've actually got it. And then of course, relationally in lockdown, we've either felt lonely or we've been in real proximity to each other 24/7. So we felt angry. But either way, the need for forgiveness, what comes out of the cross, Christians talk about Jesus being the source of forgiveness. All those things have been much more relevant. So in a way, it's felt a bit more like playing at home, whilst the previous 25 years I was playing away in terms of Christian faith. We're back on new territory on those issues.
Yeah. It's quite a specific question for this evening. What is success? Do you have personal resonance with that? Have you longed to be successful in particular areas or ways?
Well, Nick, I had a total hero brother. My older brother was a nightmare. I mean, he was head boy of the school and captain of the sports, and he got, all A's at A level. I nearly put on my UCAS form when I applied. I think I say this tonight to say that I was his brother. So I think that issue of being, and I've got dyslexia, so being content to be yourself was a battle when you've got a sibling that is just much more able. That's just the truth of it. So it was, I think having to work through that issue and not getting too driven was a real issue quite early on for me.
Yeah. And last question, you've alluded to what you kind of do as a C of E minister. You've been done for 25 years. What's your particular focus in your work? What do you give your every day to?
Well, really, honestly, Nick, it's to people's questions. We run courses online, but also, and I was talking to someone on the phone at lunchtime today when I was queuing up for my second jab, which I may say took 2.25 hours. They invited all the students in London. It was just extraordinary. And I was saying to them that you're 25, you don't even need a jab. I'm 50. I'm the one and here I am having to queue with you all, But I had a study with someone in the middle of that on the phone. And really it's questions. People are thinking, they have got questions. I was opening up the Bible and we were looking at the person of Christ. And that is the great privilege of my job. It's people bring real questions, and it's trying to point them to the person of Christ, but really hear them as well. So that's what I spend a lot of my time doing that. And we do that with Christianity Explored in Mark's Gospel. So if you've got questions this evening, I really hope you will have, then, there's a place to ask them.
Thanks, Rico. And we're very much looking forward to you addressing that question for us in just a moment. That what is success? You've pre-recorded a video talk for us. We'll upload that in just a moment. And I just want to commend this Christianity Explored course to you as well. I've found such an opportunity to explore these questions in an environment without feeling judged, where you really can just come and ask. Now you're going to be speaking from the New Testament book of Luke, really a book, I think, which really is seeking to answer some of these crucial life questions. And I'm going to read just a short passage from that gospel now before we hear from Rico. So it's going to appear on the screen. It's from chapter 12 of that book of Luke. And I'm going to read it for you now from verse 13. Someone in the crowd said to Jesus, that's him, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." Jesus replied, "Man, who appointed me a judge or an arbiter between you?" And then he said to them, "Watch out, be on your guard against all kinds of greed. Life does not consist in an abundance of possessions." And he told them this parable. The ground of a certain rich man yielded an abundant harvest. He thought to himself, "What shall I do? I have no place to store my crops." Then he said, "This is what I'll do. I'll tear down my barns and build bigger ones, and there I will store my surplus grain. And I'll say to myself, you've plenty of grain laid up for many years. Take life easy, eat, drink, be merry." But God said to him, "You fool, this very night your life will be demanded from you. then who will get what you've prepared for yourself? This is how it will be with whoever stores up things for themselves, but is not rich toward God.
I don't know what's wrong with me, but I find myself constantly reading the most inane material. I think that's why I got a third at university. When I got my third, I said to my tutor, was I close to a 2-2? He said, no, Rico, it's a very solid third. So I knew then that ordination into the Church of England was the only career option available, but I kept up these hopeless reading habits. And here's something I was reading recently. I hope you spend your reading time more profitably than me, but here's something. It's a list of lost property that was handed in at British Rail depots, and at the top of the list, to my astonishment, was a human brain that was apparently left by a medical student on a train during an away day. I don't know what you'd call that, but I think it would probably be the ultimate in absent-mindedness, I'm not sure. The other things left on the train included a pair of stuffed gerbils, a glass eye, a motorcycle and a wooden leg, and the mind boggles as to whether the same person left them all on the train. Anyway, by contrast this Friday evening, and thank you for joining us, I'd like you to use your minds, and I wonder if you could do a small exercise with me. Here it is. Henry Ford said, thinking is probably the hardest work there is, which is the probable reason why so few of us engage in it. But could you put your mind to this question this Friday night? Here it is. Do you think you're a successful person? And I don't really mean have you been in the past, or do you think you will be? But right now, would you consider yourself successful? And I guess as we grapple with that, there'd be some people who'd say, look, with all modesty, I think I am. There'd be some who've been put down so often their confidence is rock bottom. Most of us would be mucking around in the middle. My older brother was head boy and captain of everything. I remember I nearly put on my UCAS form when I applied to university that I was his brother. But I mean, where would you be on that? Well, what's interesting is there comes before us a guy in the passage today who from every perspective would have been considered successful. But was he? As we look at him, you see, what would constitute success as far as you're concerned? And this guy, here we are in Luke's Gospel, would have been considered successful, and yet God, as he looks at him, calls him a dismal failure. So in this passage, Luke 12 and verse 13, in this little parable that Jesus teaches, which is a story with a spiritual cutting edge, this man is called a fool. It's extraordinary, isn't it? You fool. That's the epitaph that God writes for him. This is the funeral card of my best mate from university. He died in 2005, so 16 years ago now, and I took his funeral. And I went to his grave with his dad, who actually I took his dad's funeral 4 years ago, but I went to his grave with his dad in about 2006. And his father was crying. And he looked at his son's grave, and they hadn't yet put the epitaph on. And he said, Rico, what epitaph do I put on my son's grave? Gosh, it was a chilling moment. It was so sad. But God writes the epitaph for this man, you fool. And the word here, fool, means without thinking. It's not that he didn't think, he did, but he didn't think about the right things. He didn't think about the really important things. So his mind time was absolutely packed with stuff. He had no more bandwidth, but he hadn't thought about, according to his creator, the really important things in life. So I wonder if we can just give our minds to that. What constitutes success in life and failure in life according to this passage? Now, interestingly, and this is so striking for COVID, because in COVID, death has gone from being a taboo subject to a reality. There's now a death salience, a death wisdom, the experts call it. People, are adjusting to its reality because of the figures on the news each night. But in this passage, Jesus has been talking in Luke chapter 12 about eternity. So this biography of Jesus, he's been talking about eternity, and people are riveted because the Bible says God has put eternity into our hearts. And in a sense, coming to faith is a bit like waking up I came to faith in 1982 when my godfather was killed in a cliff fall on the 6th of August. What I mean by that is I suddenly woke up and it was like, death is real. And that's why the pandemic over the last year has been chilling for me in a way, because it's that same feeling that I had 40 years ago. It's that sense of waking up, gosh, the reality of it. Well, Jesus is speaking about eternity. People have woken up to the brevity of life, and he's talking, and verse 5 of Luke chapter 12, this biography of Jesus written by a doctor, fear him who after the killing of the body has thrown you can throw you into hell. Gosh, what's that saying? Verse 2, there's nothing concealed that won't be disclosed. Verse 8, eternity belongs to this figure, the Son of Man. And then into all that, bang, there's suddenly an interruption, a massive interruption, and a guy in the crowd says, will you shut up about this super spiritual stuff? That doesn't put bread on the table. That's not reality. And then he just says, tell my brother, my wretched brother, to divide the inheritance with me. Let me read it to you. Verse 13. Someone in the crowd said to him, teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me. Of course, it doesn't say wretched. I put that in, but that's what he means. Because here are two brothers, and they're falling out over who's going to get Granny's sideboard and clock. I had a friend, another clergyman, who took a funeral, and during the funeral, one of the members of the family removed from the parental home what they wanted, got a removal van when everyone was out, and took what they wanted. They literally came back for the wake, and there was no dining room table. Can I advise you not to do that? It puts a bit of a shadow over Christmas. Anyway, this man is absorbed with possessions. He can't be done with Jesus' teaching, and so Jesus, after the man has said divide the inheritance, said, watch out, verse 15, be on guard against all kinds of greed. And the word watch out is get out the way, because a truck's about to hit you. It's what you shout, watch out the way. And then he arrests us with this parable that's designed to make this very angry relative, older or younger brother, actually think about whether he's actually going to go to court and serve a writ against his own brother. And some of you listening to this will know what I mean. You know what they say about a will, don't they? Wherever there's a will, there's a family. Well, that's what's happening here. They're falling out for good. And Jesus, a rabbi, says, let's think about what's important. So he says, verse 16, the ground of a certain rich man produced a good crop. So this guy knew when the EU subsidies happened exactly how to play them. The stables have been converted. I don't know, there are 4 cars outside. He probably, I don't know, comes up from I don't know, Talbot Woods in Sandbanks. Maybe he's there through the week or the weekend, but he'll be part of a hedge fund, I guess, on Bond Street in the West End. His wife up in London will shop at Harrods and Harvey Nicks, I guess. And I guess, you know, John Lewis or Waitrose will be where they are at the weekend. Where would they send their schools in your area, to their kids to school in your area? I don't know, Castle Court and Camford, I guess. I'm not sure. Be a member of Parkstone Golf Club. That's how it would work, wouldn't it? By the way, welcome if you're those things. And, you know, if you saw him commuting up to London on a Monday morning from Sandbanks, and you saw him heading up towards the city, you'd nudge your neighbour and say, look at him, as you walk past the first class. He made a fortune. Do you know 2007-8, when everyone was losing everything in that recession, he made money. He's no fool. Look at him. Verse 17 and 18. He thought to himself, what shall I do? I have no place to store my crops. Verse 18. Then he said, this is what I'll do. I'll tear down my barns and build bigger ones, and there I'll store all my grain and my goods. You see, he gets a better harvest than is expected one year. There's no panic. There's no waste. He's not going to flood the market. He gets out his calculator. He works out what to do. He works out it's definitely worth paying for a massive grain storage mountain. Waste not, want not. That's what his mum taught him. So he's got a bigger profit, and he's not going to let Rishi Sunak get hold of it. He's not going to let the tax man get it. And he calls in his accountant, and he works out how to invest it. And then, having planned and worked and thought and planned and worked and thought and absolutely given his mind time to it, it's amazing, because at 47 he's able to say to himself, verse 19, it's a wonderful moment, verse 19, I'll say to myself, you've plenty of grain laid up for many years. Take life easy, eat, drink, and be merry. And doubtless at that point, even in the midst of a pandemic, the Sunday Times magazine would do an article on him entitled, "The Man Who Knew When to Stop." And we read about him, and we read that he's now, obviously a member of Parkstone Golf Club, but he's, probably a member of Royal St George's down on the Kent coast as well, just enjoying playing that sort of coastal golf. He intends to get down to single figures at both, and he's got a wonderful house in Talbot Woods, and there's a great party down, and all the city friends have come down one weekend to celebrate his retirement. And after they've gone back, he's standing on the veranda and he's looking out at the sea, and he's got a long cool glass of, what do you think, orange juice in his hands. And he says to himself, as he looks down at the side table and he sees the magazines and he sees the chalet that they're going to get, so then they can go when the best snow's on, so they're not going to have to worry about timeshare. And Val d'Isere or Marbella or Verbier, he doesn't know where he's going to go, Aspen perhaps. And he suddenly says to himself, as he looks down there and there are safaris he's going to go on, and he suddenly says to himself, you've done it. You've done it. Ever since you were 15 years old, you dreamed of having this sort of wealth, and now you've done it. Take life easy, eat, drink, and be merry. And he has a heart attack, and he's dead before they get him to intensive care. Suddenly there's this searing pain in his chest, and he's gone. And of course, with COVID, even with people who are young and fit, we've lost one or two like that. Desperate. So here we go with this story. And what does God say to him? Verse 20. He says, you fool, this very night your life will be demanded from you. So what do they do now? Well, they hold a memorial service for him. He's got a yacht. Perhaps the ashes are thrown over the side of the yacht down in Sandbanks. And doubtless at the funeral, they'll talk about what a loyal servant of the company he was. The trade journal will say what an example he was to his profession. But I say again, when it comes to what does it mean to be successful, God says to him, you fool. Do you know, I took a funeral of a young woman, Kathy, who'd been killed agonizingly in a car crash many years ago. It was desperate to take it. But after the funeral, there was a granny there. And she said to me, Rico, what's failure? And I looked at her. She said, what's failure? I said, I don't know what you mean. She said, failure is being successful at the things that don't matter. And at that moment, there I was taking a funeral. I understood what she meant. Because as we come to this guy, we've got to ask, what about the eternal world? How successful was he in terms of the eternal world? Because what we learn in this passage, that eternally all was lost. Verse 21, this is how it'll be with anyone who stores up things for themselves but is not rich towards God. Now, I don't know about that story, but do you reckon it might have helped one of the brothers put the writ in his pocket, back in his pocket, and think, well, I'll just think about it, I'll stop, I'll think about what's important, what really matters in life? I think it would have made him think about it. And this guy made two mistakes. There are two mistakes. And this Friday evening in Bournemouth, can I just offer them to you to be chatted about? The first mistake he made in terms of what it means to constitute success in life is that he lived as though God was not there. And we don't know much about this guy. We don't know if he was a good husband or a philanderer. We don't know if he was a good, kind father or he thrashed his children. All we know is the end of verse 21 was that he was not rich towards God. Now, I would imagine that if you'd have stopped him with a vox pop and he looked out from Sandbanks and you said, look, do you believe in God? He'd have said, gosh, look at the sun going down. Look at the sea. Look at the beauty of the coast. Yeah, I believe in God. But he lived as though God wasn't there. He wasn't so much COV, Church of England, but C&E, Christmas and Easter. And actually, where was everything focused? In this passage, we learn that it was focused in on himself. He thought to himself, what shall I do? I have no place to store my crops. Then he said, this is what I'll do. I'll tear down my barns and build bigger ones. There I'll store all my grain and my goods, and I'll say to myself, he thought he was self-sufficient. Actually, he was self-centered. Samuel Butler wrote about two incredibly selfish people, Mr. and Mrs. Carlyle. He said this: how good of God to cause Carlyle and Mrs. Carlyle to marry one another and make two people miserable instead of four, because self-centered people are such a pain, aren't they? And this guy was focused in on himself. And, you know, he's got everything he wants: treasure, plenty of good things; leisure, take life easy; pleasure, eat, drink, and be merry. But God, the giver of those things, well, God was on the back burner. He wasn't going to be bothering about God at the moment. There were other things to be doing. My dad has died now, but he was a business guy. He worked in a multinational. And he said to me towards the end of his life, as he became a Christian in his mid-70s, he said, you know, the thing that's most struck me is a verse that you showed me, Rico. I showed him a verse as a sort of, I don't know, a bit of an arrogant son. I mean, he was a lovely dad, but Christian faith wasn't really a reality until his 70s. But I showed him this verse in Deuteronomy chapter 8, verses 16 and 17. That's in the Old Testament. And it's Moses addressing the people of God before they enter the promised land in the story of Israel. And he says this: you may say to yourself, my power and the strength of my hands have produced this wealth for me. But as you go into the promised land, remember the Lord your God. It's he who gives you the ability to produce wealth. So that gift of making money was a gift. But he took the gift and he forgot the giver. And what was he meant to do with his money? Well, it was great. Make as much as you can, but he was meant to be generous. But this guy just forgot about God, thought it was all down to me. And it was madness. Why is that? Because God is there and he's revealed himself to us. You know, he lived as though God wasn't there, but God is. He sends his son and he says, what do you make of my son? So this is the heart of the Christian faith. We're saying the reason it's not successful to live without reference to God is that God, as he sends Jesus, has made it perfectly plain that he wants us to relate to him. He sends Jesus, who walks off the pages of Scripture, who dies on Good Friday, who rises on Easter Day, so that we can know him. And in fact, Jesus is meant to be as central to life as a ball is to a game. Imagine a rugby match kicking off and there's no ball. They're just going through the motions. The Bible, as it speaks of Jesus, says, well, this God's Son is meant to be as central as that. And yet here's a guy who lives as though God isn't there. And God says, well, what do you think of my son, who flattened a storm, who raised a dead girl? So the Bible is about Jesus, and it says, what does it mean to be in relationship with him? He has spoken about his son. And what we're saying is, that's the heart of success, because eternity is eternity. And if we want to get to eternity, what do we have to do? We have to see the gateway to that is the cross. So he doesn't just send his son to meet us, Jesus Christ. He also sends his son to die to forgive us. When Jesus dies on the cross, he dies in our place for our wrongdoing, and he pays in death and blood for all that we've done wrong. Many years ago, when I was at Bristol University, I played rugby against a club side called Dings Crusaders. And I arrived at the Dings ground, I saw my opposite number, who had a number 3 on his back, and my trepidation was massively increased when I just saw the size of him. He was enormous, but he wasn't warming up at all. I thought, well, I wonder why that is. And I looked round, and he had a tiny baby boy in his arms. I mean, he just was massive, but there was this little boy. Just before kickoff, he handed this boy across. He walked onto the field. He ripped me limb from limb. Half-time went straight back to the baby boy. Second half came back on, threw me around like straw in the wind. As the final whistle went, that baby boy was back in the man's arms. There was no question who the father was. There was no question who the son was. I'd like to have seen anyone lay a finger on that little kid. It would have been amusing to behold the result. Do you think God loved his son, Jesus Christ, any less than that man loved his little boy, yet he sent him to die so that I could be forgiven? And this man lives as though there's no God, and God says, you're a fool. Secondly, as we finish, he doesn't just live as though there's no God, he also lives as though there's no judgment. Verse 20, but God said to him, you fool, this very night your life will be demanded from you. Then you'll get what you prepared for yourself. Yeah, this guy had a framework for living, And it didn't include eternity. And life is so short. Oh, I've taken so many COVID funerals, over 10. And you know, you stand at the graveside with so few mourners, and you say these words from Psalm 103. As for man, his days are like grass. He flourishes like a flower of the field. The wind blows its place and remembers it no more. We do flourish. In Bournemouth this summer, we'll see so many people flourishing. But it's over so quickly. And what about eternity? And surely COVID has made us ask that. And this guy lives as though there's no judgment. As though there's no day when God will say to us, Rico, did you know me? And what about your wrongdoing? Did you have it forgiven? So all the times you've taken the gifts of God, fun, family, friends, falling in love, food, fitness, they're wonderful, these gifts, but you've ignored the giver. And God says, well, where were we? And then, what have you done with my son? I sent him, and he was meant to be as central to life as a ball is to a game, but again you ignored him. And you ignored his death on the cross. And someone would say, well, I didn't think it mattered. I thought my goodness was good enough. If your goodness was good enough, why did God send his son to die? Surely the death of Jesus tells me that there's a problem with my sin. That's the word for rebelling against God, and I need to be forgiven. And God sends his son to die so that I can be forgiven. So let me close there. I'm sure there'll be questions for the Q&A, but here's a man who everyone would consider successful, and God says he's been a fool. Why? Because he lives as though there's no God and no judgment, and God has sent his son Jesus so that we'll know God. So what do you make of Jesus? And also, to what degree is success in life actually based upon how I relate to Jesus, who, well, at the very least gets me through to eternity, if the resurrection can be trusted? And what do you think of Christ's resurrection from the dead? If he got through death then, he can get me through. Lots of questions. I hope we can have a bit of a Q&A now. I know we're going to be doing that. But it was a striking thing that Granny said to me, wasn't it, at the funeral? Failure is being successful at the things that don't matter. And I can tell you, as I hold my best friend from university's funeral card, I can see the poignancy of that word. Thanks so much for listening. Let's head into the Q&A.
Well, thanks, Rico. Certainly, we do have lots of questions. I loved your definition there of failure, being successful at the things that don't matter. You probably noticed that a number of people have been posting questions either through the website, which have gone into the chat there, or directly here on the YouTube chat. We'll make time for as many of those as we can. We may not be able to cover them all, but if you've got one that's really pressing, get in and get it down there as quickly as you can. Rico, let me start with one here that's come in through the website. How does a Christian's idea of success vary from a non-Christian? That's come in on the web. How does a Christian's idea of success vary from a non-Christian?
Yeah, thanks so much. A great question. And I think when you become a Christian, it is true to say that there is a bit of a paradigm shift in your thinking. And I think what I'd say to that is that if as a Christian you start believing, which is what one does, that God made me and he made me for a relationship with him, and at the end of my life he's going to ask me, well, did you have your sin forgiven through the cross, and did we know each other? Then obviously success starts revolving around the God I think I'm going to spend eternity with. So the Bible speaks of a new creation back here. So the God who made the world will remake us, will remake our bodies, will remake the world. So if I've got that eternal perspective, then of course how I view success is pleasing the one who can grant me eternity. And that's obviously through Jesus. So that's the paradigm shift. That's what happens. Opening your eyes to eternity, seeing that far horizon, means that the stuff here, well, it's important, but I don't live just for the dot of this life. I live for the line of eternity. So I think that's what I'd say. Nick, chip in on that one. Anything you'd add on that?
No, that's very helpful. I think it's just the sense that life without God is as if it's in a box, and once you realise he's there, the lid's taken off, and there's
Yeah.
so much more, and I think that's exactly it.
Can you just give me a moment? My kids are outside the door, and that they are being quite unsuccessful at the moment. If you just
invite them in.
give me a second, I'm just going to go and execute my children, and then I'll come back.
Well, while he's doing that, Nick, can I ask you maybe to think about, just reflect on this question that's come in on the web here. It's to do with success and so on. It says, in thinking about success, why is everything about money nowadays? Why is it so important to most people, do you think? Why is everything about money? Why is it so important to most people?
Yes, I mean, it's like the fellow in the parable. We like to have, I guess, something to show for the work we've done. The things we can buy are tangible, and they are means of getting the good gifts that God gives. And I think that's what we enjoy doing. We like to substitute the one who's given, as Rico's been describing, for the things he's given. Rico, the question on the bottom of the screen now is, I've just started to answer, but you should probably have first dibs at a fuller answer. This issue of money being center stage, why is it so important to people? Why does it translate into success for most people?
Well, I'm not going to need money as much money now, because I've just knocked off one of my children, so I'm all right on that front. Look. The first thing to say is that it is great to be able to afford to keep your family, to look after people, to earn a salary. So the first thing, and the Bible commends us working hard and doing that. And if we've got the ability to make money and then be generous, that's brilliant. So I don't want to sound like some sort of negative killjoy about the importance of the commercial world or the importance of earning. Again, my salary is paid by people who work really hard, and I'm grateful for their ability to do that. But again, as Nick just said, it can be that we start going, this is all down to me. Whilst the verse that turned my dad around in his 70s was that one I quoted in the talk. You may say my power and the strength of my hands have created this wealth, but remember the Lord your God, it's he who gives you the ability to produce it. So once I start seeing it's a gift, once I start doing that, then I think it does take up an appropriate place rather than an overwhelming place.
No, thank you very much. That's really helpful.
It's a big moment for my dad in his 70s to go, oh, okay, so my ability to be able to, pay for my family, I worked really hard, but even that ability to work hard was a gift. That was a big change for him.
Yeah. We can come to a question perhaps which may be an issue that sort of some are aware of but some aren't, but it's a good question about high profile Christian leaders. And the question runs, with so many discredited high profile Christian leaders, how can we accept their message as genuine? Well, I guess we don't need to rehearse the discrediting of them, but it's a good question otherwise.
Well, I just want to say, as I begin, it's a terrible thing when Christian leaders say one thing and do another, and particularly when they have victims in their power. So they're meant to be good shepherds, and they actually kill and devour the sheep for their own ends. And I just want to say, if you've had that and come across that, it is the most terrible thing. And it was Swinburne, the poet, who said, I would love Christ if it were not for his leprous bride, the church. And there's some truth in that. There is a leprosy, but I guess this is obvious, but I do want to say it. The reason I give the talk tonight is not because I've had a friendship with Nick Hiscox for many years, or for all of you. That deep down, the reason I give the talk is because it is a great honor to try and point people to Jesus. And the whole point of the Christian faith is you say, the question of being a Christian is not, are you good enough, but are you bad enough? Are you bad enough to know you need forgiveness? So, the reason we're Christians is we get things wrong, and our leaders get things wrong, which is why always the real leader of the church has got to be Jesus Christ. But when leaders have allowed a toxic area to remain toxic and unchecked, a little corner of stuff, of toxicity and radiation. It is a terrible thing, and I'm just so sorry about that. I don't know, guys, if you'd add anything to that comment. We've got to look at Christ, but at the same time, it's so disillusioning, isn't it? I mean, I don't know if you've got any thoughts, either of you.
Yeah, I mean, I think you have summed it up well there. We need to be honest about the fact that there is discrediting happening, that people are undermining the message, but we need to point people to the one at the heart of the message, like you said there. It is all about the Lord Jesus Christ himself, and that's where we turn. Yeah.
And I think I'd say as well, you know, I mean, it sounds a silly thing to say, but certainly at my church, there's been an absolute revolution on safeguarding the last 5 years, 10 years. You know, if we see wrong behavior, it is, in fact, I had a situation like this today with someone within my own church, that you do send it in, you report it. So I think all I can say is we're trying to respond with structures of safeguarding that acknowledge the toxicity almost in all of us, and just leave it for the Christian leader to decide how they're going to cope, or whether they're going to turn a blind eye. You know, I do think safeguarding has got real merits in terms of forcing an accountability. I don't know what you think, guys. It's exhausting to be doing, but I think it does make the church safer.
Yeah, it's become an essential part of life. In order, we trust it serves some protection, so that some leaders can keep doing some job, even though everyone is at fault in some way or other.
But keep looking at the person of Christ, and he died because we need forgiveness. But also, I think the last thing I'd say is, at the heart of any church, I think, is one word: repentance. In other words, when you see something wrong, you really try and turn away from it. And you know, that's from top to bottom. So I want to say that I just want to take incredibly seriously this call to repent. So it means turning around, and actually God sent his Spirit to help us do that. Now, when these leaders, there's sin and they just haven't turned around from it, that is appalling. But it doesn't mean that call to repent is not something that we've all just got to keep heeding. You know, and if it's for the 500th time I get something wrong, which I can, and I must say over lockdown, you know, losing my temper was a bad thing. But I've got to go to my kids or my wife. God, darlings, I'm sorry. That was wrong. I got that wrong. Please forgive me. And I think really having the humility to admit stuff, but then the battle to turn away from it.
No, thank you very much. It's honest, I think, and a word that needs saying in the current climate. Let's come to another question, kind of about the evidence that we can expect from God. The question runs: if a non-theist shows true altruism throughout their life, and despite maintaining a genuine search for the truth, finds no burden of proof for the existence of God, how can they be punished for not discovering what's not been presented to them? I think you've touched on this a bit, but perhaps anything more to add to that?
Yes, just to say, when I'm answering questions of people, I often, as they ask, I'm thinking, is it that this person can't believe or they won't? So, you know, I had many rugby mates and I like them very much, but, you know, the reason they weren't going to go near Christian faith was it didn't match the lifestyle they wanted to live, and therefore, you know, they weren't interested, because deep down they were going, no one's going to tell me how to live. I'll behave as I want to. But there are other people who it's not I won't believe, but I just can't. They're real issues, and I can't believe them. Now that non-theist, I hear that. All I'd like to say is that I'd just love to chat with you individually and hear you, because I do think that the evidence is good. So that's the first thing. Let's have a chat, and I don't know what's being presented, but and what type of evidence would be appropriate. Faith is three things: you get the information, you understand the meaning, and then you act on it. And it's those three steps. And if someone, you know, they just can't get there. The last thing I'd say, though, is that honestly, you ask me what will God do or say at the end of their life. I just have to put that person in God's hands. I'm not going to say what's happening. That's like me pretending to be the headmaster at a school prize giving and think I can give out the prizes. I mean, it's up to God to judge them and judge how they've treated the information that the Bible claims he's given them. So again, I'd be very, very wary to make any statement on the final thing of what will God do. I think there, but I would say I'd love to chat to them about the reason that they can't believe when they're trying, but also warn those who might go behind that, but really they won't because they want to run their own life. Be warned, can't and won't are categories that the Bible speaks of, and we've got to try and be one, not the other.
And just kind of follow up with that, Rico, where would you point people to for the kind of the best burden of proof, as the Christians claim? What should they look at? Or
well, I'd love to chat with them, but obviously, I think that the resurrection of Jesus is the rock of Gibraltar. I know it's against the laws of nature, but we are convinced that Jesus rose from the dead. So I'd love to be having a chat about what they thought of the resurrection, because I think that gives the Christian faith historical roots. Mike, I don't know if you'd add anything on evidence, but I think I'd go with that.
I would agree with you there, and I think it's there to be discovered, isn't it? There is a lot of evidence. There's a lot of resources now on the internet to make it easy. There's a lot in that way, but I think what resonated with me with what you were sharing there, Rico, was the heart of the person asking the question.
Yeah,
is it a can't or a won't? And we as Christians are not about encouraging people to take a leap into the dark. We want to invite you to come and investigate these things with us, with an open Bible, with the things that can be looked at, that give us a real sense of confidence in all of those things surrounding the resurrection, as you mentioned it there, and to invite people with questions like this to come and engage with us. It may well be that if you're watching this either live now or somebody's passed it on to you, somebody's actually encouraged you to look at it. I think I'd encourage you, if these are the kind of things that you're grappling with, that you'd start conversing with them. Ask them to open the Bible with you and look at these things together. Yeah.
Great, thank you very much, Mike. Next one is a sort of comment, and perhaps a question I can check I've got this right, but the comment is, I guess if we are poor, I'm guessing that means materially poor, but have a relationship with Jesus, well, then we are successful? Question mark.
Yes. Could I ask you to ask me that question again in 1,000 years' time? That's the issue. I mean, if we think eternity is eternity, and Paul the Apostle says this life and its troubles are like a bit of fluff. It's so short, this life. Once you're convinced of the brevity of life, that becomes real. So Psalm 90 verse 12 says, teach us to number our days aright, that we may gain a heart of wisdom. As the Bible speaks of my life, it says it's like a breath. It's like water you drop into the ground. It's like chaff you throw in the air and it blows away. It's like a dream when you wake up in the morning and it's gone. I mean, if I really grasp the brevity of life, then the key thing is a relationship with Jesus, who pulls me through to a new creation. And again, what's interesting there is that stops me being a materialist now, because I'd love to go to Fiji. I'm not going to get there in this life, I don't think, but I can get there in the new creation if God remakes the world he's made and brings me back the new body. So on materialism, God says, cool it, you're going to inherit it all then. So it does allow me to focus on the right things, because if I really believe eternity's coming, because Jesus' resurrection guarantees it, suddenly, I'm successful if I know him. Guys, anything you'd add on that?
I think that's really helpful, and I would also encourage you, as Jesus does, to look at those who found this kind of value, this treasure. He talks in one of his parables about the treasure of his kingdom being like treasure found in the ground in a field, and a man selling everything he can to have that field in order to have that treasure. And I think for those people who've understood what you've been sharing with us this evening, Rico, that there are such everlasting riches to be found in Jesus, a relationship with him, with putting him there at the not just at the center of your life, but over your life, in control, as ruler over you. You watch what some people choose to do who have found that, and you discover that they're gradually losing, or rather that materialism is gradually losing its grasp on them. I've especially noticed it over the years in my own life with those around me who are going on in years. And as, if you like, materially and strength and physical abilities are stripped away, so often there is a growing joy and anticipation and a hunger for being with Jesus. There was a lovely old chap, Jack, in a church I was at in Lincoln quite some years ago, and he used to come up to me so often, just with tears in his eyes, and just say, he could do so little, but he used to say, I can't wait to see Jesus. And in his last days, I was visiting him in a care home. And I don't know if you've ever had this experience. I came away quite angry because he had little family. They weren't looking after him particularly well, often overlooked. And yet the last thing I said to him is, I almost felt as if it was worthless what I was offering. But I said, is there anything I can do for you? Anything I can get you? And without even thinking, he just looked at me and said, well, no, I've got Jesus. And I'll never forget that. You can't deny it. And so I'd encourage you as well to look out for people who live by what they claim to have found in Jesus. Yeah.
I think we've got time for one more. We're going to call this the last question, and hope that if you have more to ask and want to get in touch with either church, Lansdowne Church or Prospect Westbourne, we can gladly hear from you and perhaps meet up and help you further. But here's a last question, which is kind of a little bit more perhaps from a Christian perspective, or more sympathetic at least. Is there a case of running before you can walk in faith? What if you had zeal for sharing your faith, and then some trial came and you became faithless? Whilst you still believe, how would you suggest getting back to being vocal about your faith with others? There's quite a lot in there, but it's a kind of what can reignite the sense of speaking out about what you've known to be true but have lost conviction in, perhaps?
Yeah, do you know, it was very interesting. At the end of the Second World War, Moltmann, who was a theologian, he said, I can only believe in a crucified God. So he'd known so much pain himself. He said, I can only believe in a God who, it's almost as though Jesus was not, having been crucified and died such a terrible death, he wasn't unfamiliar with suffering and pain. So, you may say, well, look, I've got this faith, and I've tried to go forward, and I've been in great pain, or something hasn't worked. I just want to say that, if Jesus comes to die, so he knows what pain is, and then the next thing is that the Christian faith says this: if God's in control on Good Friday, he's in control today. So you look at Good Friday, and it was just such a mess. But actually, Jesus was dying for my sin on that day. But when you looked at it, it looked terrible. And the Bible says that actually, if we can trust God to be in control, then we can trust him now. So I guess it's a question of trying to look at Jesus' suffering, trying to look at God being in control even on Good Friday, and saying, well, okay, what are the lessons I've learned to go forward now? So that's one point. I just make a second, and that is that I don't know what, I'd again love to chat to you about it, but quite often I find people's faith isn't in God, but it's in their agenda for God. So they go, God, this should have worked out. This should have happened. That should have happened. And it didn't. And therefore, I've lost my trust in you. And sometimes we can look, and again, I don't know who the question is, so this may be most unfair, but sometimes we can say, look, God, I want you to be a divine waiter. You deliver my daydreams, what I most want. And actually, what I most need from God is Good Friday, where I'm forgiven, Easter Day, where I get to the new eternity, and whatever other suffering I have, again, in 1,000 years' time, I'll go, well, doesn't seem to matter. So that's quite a long answer, but a couple of things there. If God's in control on Good Friday, is he in control today? Can you therefore still trust him because he suffered so much? And then thirdly, as we what was the nature of that experience you have? How are you interpreting it? I want to say that very gently because I don't want to sit here and ride roughshod over it. It may have been very painful. Anything to add on that? I may have got the wrong end of the stick there, guys. Anything?
I was just going to say something that's been a real help to me as well. I think in Paul in 2 Corinthians refers back to something that David said about, he has to speak because he believes, and it was David in that psalm was going through a very difficult experience, but experienced something of the Lord holding him and bringing him through it. And it was that gave him confidence. He had something he had to tell people. It was an amazing thing. And Paul seems to be saying when you've experienced something of the resurrection of Jesus, not delivering you from today's problems, but holding you to Christ in the middle of them, then I think as you dwell on that and as you see him in that, you will find yourself increasingly wanting to tell people. And I'd encourage you at that point to trust God to give you opportunities, not to feel like you've got to make them happen. Yeah.
Rico, thank you so much for your really helpful answers and understanding answers. Please thank Lucy, won't you, for sparing you when you could have been at home and not having gone to Ireland, which I think you were due to do. And you better thank Peter and Daniel and Mercy as well for putting up with Daddy being out for another evening. But we're very grateful to you, and thank you very much indeed for superly helpful talk and for your great answers to our inquiries.
Yeah, thanks, Rico. Thanks ever so much. Well, if this evening locally, then you can come again on Sunday, both either to Christchurch Westbourne or to Lansdowne. Join us online, because Rico's going to be speaking again on Sunday morning at both of our services. It'll be a pre-recorded talk again, but looking at that question, how does God really feel about me? And I would say, if you've still got questions, especially if this evening you feel some of them haven't been answered, or maybe something of what's been shared has provoked even more questions with you, then we want to encourage you to make the most of the opportunities that are probably around you for discussing those. I think the first thing I'd encourage you to do is to seek out the person who put you onto this video event this evening, or passed on this video to you. Start discussing it with them, ask them, press them. If these things are real, then you can keep asking those questions until you find the gold of the truth in the midst of those answers. But I'd also like to invite you to Christianity Explored. It's been mentioned a few times this evening. Christchurch Westbourne are running Christianity Explored at the moment, and the details are on their website, and you can get in touch with them through their church office. And for us at Lansdowne as well, we're starting a new course this coming Wednesday. We'd love to have you there. You can come and dip your toe, see if you think you'll like it. You can ask your questions. You can sit quietly if you want to, but it's just an informal environment in which we look at the Bible, and where you can ask questions without fearing that anyone's going to look down on you for doing it. Well, if you've enjoyed this event this evening, then do click a like on YouTube or share it, pass it on to someone else. It's been a great joy to have you join us. Goodbye.